Lincoln police say a woman struck and killed two men with her vehicle today. The incident took place in the parking lot of an apartment building.
This happened at the Lodge Apartments near 48th Street and Nebraska Parkway. Police arrested the suspect, and she's charged with 2 counts of second-degree murder. Lincoln police say officers are interviewing witnesses. It's not yet clear what the motive is.
I mean, this is a little more complex than one would think. We need to really find out the purpose, the reason why she did what she did.
Police say the woman lives at that apartment complex. They have not yet released her name or the names of the 2 men who were killed. Chief Ewan says there were several witnesses, and investigators are now working to track down any video that may be out there.
And now to the